Hey, how's it going, guys? Who was the guy who was building that AMM option derivative platform? Good job. So today I'm going to talk about Ethereum scalability, but more application specific with regards to Dexys and DeFi. And obviously, I'm going to plug my this project I'm contributing to, which is called Injective. So currently, the entire Ethereum DeFi ecosystem is really designed around EVM constraints and on-chain constraints. And so you can see that it's not a direct replication of the traditional markets and the matching mechanism and the overall kind of ecosystem components. And that's because obviously with the possibilities of Ethereum and obviously with everything around EVM that enables and also constrains an entirely new form of exchange mechanism and also decentralized finance mechanism born from this. So let's go through the most classic or the most well-known DEX mechanism on Ethereum, which is constant function market maker. And so the really cool thing about CFMM is that it's a very succinct and very simple representation of this entire broad pricing and liquidity, just simply with three parameters, which is X, Y, and K. And it basically allows for this extremely kind of gas efficient and overall like computation efficient extraction of liquidity and the overall representation of liquidity on Ethereum compared to central limit order book, which probably has megabytes of data of order book for every single tick. But obviously there are downsides that comes with it, which is CFMM liquidity expressions are generally static and limiting. And obviously, as a continuous representation of liquidity amongst all price levels, CFMM doesn't have that discrete and dynamic representation of liquidity. And generally, obviously, for CFMM, it requires arbitrageurs to ensure price synchrony for the global markets that are trading outside of this AMM pool. So the downside of this is that generally the price or the mid price is bounded by the swap fees, which may cause some differentiation or difference compared to a global mid price of 0.3% typically. And obviously with the EVM design constraints, MVV incurs additional taker risk and sandwich attacks and so forth. So it generally does create this cost prohibitive order execution for this kind of naive implementation of CFMM. And generally you can notice, from a capital efficiency perspective, there's high slippage. The swap fee is still decently big as it is required to compensate the IL for liquidity providers. And there's a decent amount of gas costs, especially during high traffic times. And so when we look at the DeFi takers or the DeFi users for these type of CFMM markets, they're generally bounded by two economic constraints. Number one is the base cost, which is every execution, there's a fixed gas cost regardless of the transaction size. So it puts a cap on the minimum order size that can justify this type of trade. And there's, on top of that, an upper bound in trading fee and variable slippage cost that kind of create this upper ceiling of the order size that makes it worth it for people to transact on a traditional CFMM exchange. But obviously, this is a more traditional model. There has been a lot of really amazing improvements within the DeFi space. For example, Uniswap v3, it has this notion of a non-fungible position that creates this type of very dynamic curve order book and concentrated liquidity CFMM. And it's a very strong improvement upon V2, and as you can see, the slippage and the volume compared to the capital state has improved drastically. And overall, it's extremely EVM layer 2 friendly because, first of all, it doesn't have that much liquidity requirement to provide really, really strong slippage, well, really, really good slippage. And obviously, in order to effectively LP for these type of pools, it requires quite constant and frequent adjustment of these positions on top of Uniswap v3. So on Ethereum, it is somewhat expensive and it's quite costly, especially during extreme volatile events. But that being said, really, really strong improvement. And traditionally, there's also, since the first day of 0x and slightly before that, Ether Delta and so forth, there's off-chain order book. It's somewhat centralized. It does have safety, liveness, and censorship concerns. But the good thing is that it's extremely fast. And obviously, sometimes I think 0x later version has gotten a lot better at this, but it does have composability limitations, which doesn't fully leverage the greater DeFi. And layer 2 EVM-based order books, as we start seeing with some of the newer implementations, are also becoming this kind of like data availability for these discrete order types, but it still kind of suffers from scalability versus composability trade-off, because at the end of the day, layer 2 execution is still quite expensive. Yeah, so this is when I start talking about the project that I'm supposed to be showing. So what is Injective? So Injective is a application-specific blockchain that's a lot more Ethereum-centric. It's mainly built for DeFi trading, derivatives, and Web3 apps that are focused on the overall decentralized finance ecosystem and focusing on leveraging the order book infrastructure that's native to Injective. So this is kind of like going back a few years. Back then, when Injective kind of first started, there was kind of like a consensus checklist for the requirements in order to build a robust order book model. And so first of all, it requires instant finality, just because generally, in the event of a fork, it's extremely hard to reconcile past trades, and the experience, especially for probabilistic finality, creates this very, very big problem around market making, especially for order book-based models, because it's not really it's not only a state of the trade that you're persisting, you're also persisting the order book itself, which might cause kind of like a retroactive crossing if the finality is probabilistic. Fast consensus. Just because it's order book at the end of the day, it changes quickly. You don't want to update it too slow. And obviously account model instead of UTXO model, and ideally a huge plus for this would be an account sub-account model, which allows for permissioning for trading, for deposits, withdrawals, kind of similar to centralized exchange, and kind of similar for how institutional users on top of these centralized exchanges generally interact. And it's also created this entire ecosystem, especially this DeFi spin of it, where essentially some account holder or balance holder can delegate some of the permissions to other users, such as like a professional trader or like a professional manager, to manage their balance with only certain trading permissions rather than the deposit and withdrawal, so they can't exactly rug you. And modularized architecture that's future-proof, because we all know we've been waiting for ETH2 for a while. And so ideally, like it can be a plug and play. It doesn't compromise, every single module within the chain itself. And on top of that, it can basically remove plug and play. It just allows for a lot more flexibility rather than some consensus level or some sort of additional changes that might kind of create this entire avalanche of dependencies that are broken. And generally, would love to have a path to scalability, because technically speaking, blockchains don't scale, but it should allow for the option of scalability via layer 2, via horizontal scaling, via IBC, and a nice bonus would be environmentally friendly. And so that's kind of how Injective ended up adopting Cosmos, getting its own spin on it towards building this chain. So one of the most key module within Injective is the exchange module. It's a very efficient and chain-level on-chain order book. So it has this consensus-level frequent batch auction order matching that very much designed around the constraints and features of blockchain itself. Because obviously, during the gossiping process, the transaction ordering is completely unknown, or it's probabilistic in nature. So it creates this entire race of MVV and other type of extractable values and other type of non-determinism that kind of brings some concern for a lot of users that are specifically focused on exchange. And definitely, especially nowadays, we started seeing a lot of MVV issues. So it obviously becomes kind of a concern over time. But the way frequent batch auction works is that it kind of removes that ordering variable away from the matching process, so that front running is impossible. There's no incentive for manipulating the ordering. And so that's a lot more of a blockchain-centric design for order book-based model or a CLOB model. And there's a generalized derivative module that supports any type of futures trading, derivatives. It can be extensible and modified in a lot of different extremely flexible applications. And we actually recently realized that it's completely possible to utilize the time expiry future for number one options, prediction markets, and so forth. And these are all just possibilities that are extremely easy to deploy and plug and play. And more importantly is a persistent and manipulatable order book state. So basically, the order book state is always exposed on-chain, and every block has this new order book state that obviously takes in the matching and the input from the previous block. And so this allows this extremely dynamic and extremely real-time liquidity representation for every single block that allows DeFi developers to get a sense of the current liquidity representation of a certain market, and allows application to take advantage of a lot more dynamic liquidity data and actually build more interesting applications on top of it. And of course, a lot of these order placements and also position management, and also just in general, for derivative, it can all be exported and manipulated by, for example, a smart contract and so forth. And there's instant finality thanks to Cosmos SDK. And selective delay is this feature where cancellation is prioritized before matching so that basically no orders are being sniped. And another huge user experience problem that we noticed when we were first building out the protocol is the fee delegation issue, which basically being on a new chain, being on an L2 solution, there's often times where you require a native token. And that's kind of degrading for the user experience because you can't really get it to even make the first trade. So basically, for any type of relayer, there's an incentive mechanism for the user to not pay any fee or not even noticing that there's a gas fee and so forth, and give away the trading fee around, currently the default is 40%, but obviously modifiable by governance. And basically provide it to relayers to front the gas fee for the user so that it's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind situation. Yeah, so what does it mean? So there's this entire, kind of base layer infrastructure, and from a user perspective, it means nothing unless they can't use it or they can't interact with it. So currently there are around 5 exchanges already building on top of Injective as kind of this relayer that are providing this custom and bespoke user experience targeting specific sectors of the market. And so some of them went the complete DEX experience, basically having that swap page, having that very interesting order book display format, and some of them just went the complete centralized exchange type of user experience where people deposit into trading accounts and people can just make trades, place limit orders, and so forth. So it has this very, very interesting kind of interpretation of this on-chain state and utilized towards different applications. And it's fast, zero gas fees for a general user, obviously unlimited markets because it's permissionless, and it has a chain agnostic stance in general. So from the protocol layer, the most important part here is that while Injective has that bridge layer that supports any type of arbitrary ERC20 with IBC plus more, it can also support any type of chain without actually worrying about any type of mismatch and so forth. And it's obviously as a blockchain, it's supposed to be decentralized, secure, and borderless. Yeah, and I just mentioned about the Injective bridge. And so one of the most interesting thing, building with the Cosmos ecosystem is that we got to contribute towards a lot of different projects back in the day that were still very much in the brainstorming phase, and one of them was the Peggy bridge. And Peggy bridge was back then, it had an orchestrator that was written in Go, and we kind of took it from there and created our take of this Injective bridge. And so the Injective bridge works by backing, essentially the validators act as a signer on top of the Ethereum contract and approving any type of, watching and approving any type of deposits and transfers between Ethereum and Injective. So the slashing and the consensus directly ties to the validator's responsibility for managing this bridge. And we actually went through a very, very long type of canary type phase to ensure the contract security on top of Ethereum, and to basically make sure that there's nothing that goes wrong, there's no hacks and so forth, there's no bridging compromise, as we've noticed recently. And on top of that, there's fast confirmation because, again, the approval and confirmation process works on the injective layer rather than the Ethereum layer. So therefore, the deposit and withdrawal doesn't have to go through a 7-day process. It's directly tied with the security of the injective chain consensus itself. And something that we're working on that's very, very exciting actually is enabling arbitrary data transfer. And arbitrary data transfer, you can understand it as basically opening up a lot more possibility for composability within DeFi to injective transactions. First of all, if you attach these type of arbitrary data within a deposit transaction, you can create these atomic transactions to injective that will be automatically executed and interpreted. Or it could be a fully atomic transaction where it deposits from Ethereum, executes interacts with the exchange module, makes some transactions, and then comes back. So the possibility here is really immense. And one of the key focus at the Injective Labs team is to be able to build basically this type of suite of tools that allows this type of interpretation and execution of arbitrary data transfer. And I'll get to that later. Another thing that's really cool is the Oracle component, and obviously this is to support a derivatives module. So basically, it's very much of a future-proof Oracle module for the overall injective ecosystem. So it powers injective derivatives, and it currently has a pretty generalized support. First of all, it supports any type of arbitrary centralized Oracle. It also supports Band Oracle and Chainlink OCR. And one thing that Injective Labs team is currently working on is the DeFi price feeds and submitting more generalized data that's not only used for a derivative module. And that's something that's very much exciting to look forward to. So far, Injective Chain is still a very, very new ecosystem. But there's already quite a few interesting milestones that are being hit. I believe this data is a little bit outdated. So there's 4 billion in cumulative trading volume on top of Injective Pro, which is one of the exchanges. There's 7 million blocks produced since June of the Canary launch. 21 million plus on-chain transactions since November, which is a canonical, which is kind of like the secure version, secure chain that the community agreed on. And so far, I believe there's around $1.5 million worth of INJ burned, which is 0.2% of the total supply, give or take. So it's overall, given the burn process, it kind of returns the value of the protocol back to the ecosystem participants. And so far, there's 5 exchange dApps. I think there's 2 more that's coming up. One that's actually announced today. That's pretty exciting. And obviously, with the V2 bridge, we actually saw a lot more traction with the redesign. Actually, it's a quite simple redesign UI experience, and basically it tells the user exactly what the status of the transfer is and what's the ETA, whether something's wrong with it. And that actually just exploded the interest. And I think that's actually very, very exciting because we never thought that basically just a slightly better UX will cause such a immense change within kind of the user behavior. And just in general, with IBC and so forth, there's integration with Cosmos, Terra, Osmosis, and a lot more. And it's one of the largest utilization of the IBC because Injective and Band kind of feeds Oracle data between each other. And so Band kind of feeds, the latest price feeds, from their Cosmosm contract and submits it through Injective Oracle module. And so that actually brings extremely heavy IBC usage just because it's arbitrary data transfer rather than token transfer. And I think this data is also outdated. It's probably around double that by now. Yeah, so there's obviously a lot more exciting development for the Injective ecosystem because obviously Injective is still a very, very new community. So obviously, one of the most exciting thing that Injective is working on is the Cosmosm smart contracts. And the reason why EVM comes a little bit later, I'll get to that a little bit later. So basically, the reason why Cosmosm smart contract is so important for the Injective chain is that it can be plugged in as a module that kind of sits within the Injective core stack independently almost. And yet, it can interact very intimately with the Injective chain core modules in a very Cosmos native way. So that this allows the manipulation of order data, positions, and also create a lot more possibilities that's simply not possible on Injective before. So overall, at the end of the day, Injective is still an application specific or like an ecosystem specific chain. So for the Cosmos smart contract, it's mainly going to be about DeFi applications that utilize the order book infrastructure. So it kind of encourages an ecosystem of decentralized applications on Injective, focusing on obviously DeFi trading, prediction markets, and other cool DeFi wizard stuff. And with the help of instant finality and also MEV resistance, I always get that wrong for some reason. So basically, it creates a much safer environment for DeFi builders. And the possibility is just very much immense. Yeah. And so basically, the path for Injective to reach the EVM compatibility and adding that EVM layer is actually a lot more interesting because it's going to utilize the shared security model of Cosmos that's under Works and utilize the Injective validators to back and secure a kind of like a child chain of EVM layer so that the block time are a lot more flexible compared to the main Ethereum Injective chain. So it's no longer constrained by that 1 second block time constraint. And there's a very, very intimate internal bridge that was actually worked on way back in the day by the Injective Labs team to be re-implemented once the shared security model is out. Yeah, so due to time constraints, I'll probably just make it very, very quick for the rest of this. So Injective is extremely special because it allows for data availability for expressive and discrete liquidity. And it has this composability possibility that was never done before for like central limit order books. And so obviously, you guys can already imagine all the possible things you can do on top of it. AMM with no IL, on-chain arbitrage bots, MM strategies, and basically, like billion-dollar hedge funds or billion-dollar prop shops strategies are being exposed on-chain and accessible to everyone. And obviously, that's very exciting. And for Injective as a chain itself, it's going to become like the liquidity aggregation, and it's going to create this entire ecosystem of robust and deterministic, low-cost order execution environment for DeFi applications, and hopefully, one day the best slippage as well. And yeah, the possibility is simply endless. Yeah, and yeah, start now, and this is the link for kind of interacting the overall Injective chain, and it's a great starting ground for any type of developers or users. And that's pretty much my talk.